It's no secret that developers sometimes deliver alterations of the same concept. For those of you who play Rainbow Six Siege, an example of this might be Zofia being assigned Grade of Ash. For those of you who are fans of Dead Space, the currently in development Negative Atmosphere game is also an example. Warframe is no different, as is the case with the plains of Eidolon and Fortuna, both of which are open-world zones with their own theme, exclusive syndicates, and layer of grind. Creativity has its boundaries, especially when time constraints, manpower, and resources all have to be considered, so it's no surprise that sometimes you'll see what appears to be the same thing, but with a different paint job. The upcoming Plains of Duviri almost gives off that impression of oh, it's another open world, but this time it has a new faction and your operator is now older. Is that necessarily a bad thing? No. At least, not in my opinion. It's easy to see how someone could get upset by playing through similar content, because after all, nobody wants to run through the exact same farming grounds month after month. However, when it comes to innovating content, the one thing that really matters is how much originality there is to begin with. In order to be considered new, you first have to ask the question, does the quote-unquote repainted content bring enough original material to the table to warrant being called new content? For example, consider Gauss and Volt. Once Gauss's identity as the fast Warframe was revealed, some people were flustered at the idea that Gauss as a new Warframe would potentially overshadow and/or power creep Volt out of relevance, because this has indeed happened before. As we know now, that didn't happen, because being fast isn't the only thing Volt is good at. As another example, consider the plains of Eidolon and Fortuna. While both areas are indeed open-world zones with their own exploration, activities, and bosses to be fought, they both differ not just in the size department, but also in terms of what enemies you're fighting against. As much as some people might despise Fortuna for being a reskin of the plains of Eidolon, you will never fight a nullifier on the plains. You will never fight Ghoul in Fortuna. So long as you change the player's experience, whether it be by changing the enemies they fight or the atmosphere and setting of where they're playing, then you can consider it to be new content, even if the idea is the same. As an example, take a look at Pokémon. The concept has been the same ever since its inception in the 90s, yet it still remains popular despite its games being technically repetitive. It's able to accomplish this because of one simple reason: innovation. Even though the idea of catch-and-fight Pokémon remains unchanged, the experience is different, because the visuals, the setting, the adversaries, and other aspects of gameplay are changed. From a developer perspective, this makes sense. If something works the first time, why not try it again over and over and over? However, this is where you have to draw the line. As grindy as Warframe is, relying on content that forces the player to do the same thing over and over is not an effective or good idea, especially if the content in question isn't enjoyable. Take for instance, Operation Buried Debts. Although Warframe is at its core a game all about shooting and grinding for the sake of progressing for loot and more things to shoot, it has the nickname of Farming Simulator for good reason. Sure, we might have in-head content that exists to distract us from the monotony of grind, such as raids, fishing or hunting, or Fashion Frame, but at the end of the day you cannot escape the basis of Warframe being shoot for loot and hope it isn't a crapshoot. Operation Buried Debts served to remind us of this fact. Buried Debts was and is considered one of the worst community events we've had, primarily because it put the player into a repetitive experience but with little to no new material to compensate. Throw in some enemies that can ignore abilities and rewards that aren't exactly exciting, and you have yourself a recipe for something not good. The point is, it's fine to develop content that has the same basic principle behind it, so long as it brings along new things to see and do in order to consider being called new to begin with. Although not as small as it used to be, Warframe is still an ever-evolving game, which is probably why we won't leave beta for at least another 10 years. Thank you for watching.